I have ridden long miles with the sound of wind for company in the shape of old memories riding a half step behind me. The desert keeps its own kind of time. It does not forget, not truly, and it forgives even less. I learned that when I was a boy, and the sun could turn a strip of river into hammered copper, and a father's temper could turn a kitchen into a courtroom. Later, I learned it again, out where the land stretches until sky grows tired and sinks into it, and a man is nothing but a moving speck between two infinities. That is where I found her, and that is where everything that followed began. I was headed south of Willow Creek, an hour or more until sundown by my reckoning, the kind of light where even a tired horse looks noble. The air had that metallic taste the wind carries when it has blown across dry grass for too long. My mare Dulcie stepped steady, ears loose, the reins heavy in my hand. I had no business to hurry toward, and none chasing me from behind. Only the simple errand of salt blocks wrapped in burlap, and a coil of new rope snug to my saddle horn. It is a comfort to ride with plain needs. A man can almost mistake it for happiness. Across the flats to my left, a thread of dust pulled up from the earth like smoke from a brush fire. I watched it a spell, thinking it might be wind devils kicking at the open, the way they do when the ground is restless. Then I saw the shape at the heart of it, a wagon running rough, the team unsettled, lines jerking. The road there is nothing but two intentions through scrub and stone, and whoever held those reins had taken them too hard or too long. I turned Dulcie with a squeeze of my knee and pointed her toward the ruckus. I do not claim to be a savior. The land breaks men who go about with that notion. What I am is stubborn about what a man ought to stand for and what he ought not to ignore. A beating is one of those things the world tries to look away from, same as a coyote tugging at a fence-caught calf. I have turned away my share. I carry those turns like small stones in my pockets. Maybe that is why my hands found the horn and then the spur. Maybe it was nothing of me at all, and the day had already decided. As we drew closer, the wagon tilted and yawed. There was a figure on the box seat, broad and leaning forward, the set of someone riding mean. Beside him, a woman sat small and straight, a scarf tied under her chin, hands folded as if she were praying not to be noticed. I saw it then, the hard swing of the man's elbow, the woman's head tipped with the blow, and she did not reach to the bench for balance, only steadied herself with some born-in habit of surviving. The sight came to me quick and hot, the way some memories do when the present opens a trap door and you fall through it. A boy's kitchen, a tin cup skipping across the floor, my mother's quiet voice, as if quiet could soften a storm, my father's breath, sharp with whiskey and rage. I shook the vision loose and stood in the stirrups. The wagon jounced into a rut. The woman's scarf loosened. She did not look my way. She looked once into the distance, toward a line of cottonwoods that have stood there longer than any of my kind. And then she made a choice. She stood up on that rocking board, as if it were a church step, and put both hands on the rail. I knew it a heartbeat before she did it, the way you know a colt is about to bolt or a storm is about to break. She jumped. The body falls faster than a thought. I do not remember kicking Dulcie forward, nor dropping the rein. I remember the wind on my teeth because I had my mouth open to curse or call, and I remember that woman's dress catching the sun so it looked for one surprised instant like a bluebird breaking from a thorn bush. She fell crooked, sideways, not like a thing surrendering to the ground, but like a thing wresting itself loose from it. I came out of the saddle while Dulcie was still moving, boots scraping leather, the world swinging lazy around me. I hit the earth astride ahead of her, reached up, and the two of us met in the air between the wagon and the ground. The weight of a falling person is more than the sum of pounds. It is a declaration and a reckoning. She knocked the wind out of me, and I took us both down, my hat gone, shoulders screaming. Stones bit my hip, and dust climbed into my throat. I rolled to keep her tucked against me, and felt the world slam once, then again, then settle. Behind us, the wagon careened to a halt, the man on the seat swearing, lines tangled around his fists. Dulcie planted herself like a saint and snorted, waiting for my word. The woman lay still in the crook of my arm, breath fast and shallow. I did not lift her scarf because I knew what a bruised face looked like without seeing it. I knew where the tender places would be, the ones a man avoids with his eyes so he can keep on calling himself decent. I said the first thing that came to me in a voice I keep for skittish horses and elder dogs. "You are all right, ma'am. You are all right now." She did not answer. Her fingers were clenched in the front of my shirt so tight the cloth bunched and creaked. I felt the fine tremor in her hands and the steadier one in her ribs. The wagon man climbed down hard, boots thumping dirt, and he came toward us with that crooked swagger some men wear like a badge. I stood taking her up with me because I knew I would not put her back on the earth until she told me herself to do it. The man stopped 3 paces away. He had the sallow, bloodshot look of someone for whom anger is a way of breathing. "She is my wife," he said. That was all of his argument, but he said it as if the land itself ought to make way. I have seen brands burned into hide. I have seen a man use the heat of iron to claim something living and call it lawful. I have never yet believed the iron gives him the right to be cruel. I told him as much. Quiet. The quiet mattered. He had a gun, but so did I, and there are some arrangements of temper and space and daylight where a gun makes things more honest, and some where it makes them more foolish. This was a foolish one. "You can ride on," I said, "and you can leave her in peace." He laughed, the way dry wood breaks, brittle and sudden. He said some things men say to make themselves large. I will not repeat them. There was a smell on his breath I knew. There was a way his eyes moved that said he would be careless with a trigger. The woman lifted her head then, just enough for me to see her eyes. They were not crying eyes. They were river eyes, deep and cold in the center, and I felt something settle inside me like a coin dropping into a well that had not seen rain in years. "Please," she said. That was all. It was not a plea, not the kind that begs. It was a word spoken by someone who has come to the door of a house she has never entered and hopes to find a light on inside. I turned my body a little so that if the man shot, he would have to go through me first. I have played that kind of card before. You pull it once or twice in a life, and your hand changes. It is a long ride from the edge of violence back to the ordinary. It took us 3 minutes and most of my patience. I told the man my name and where to find the sheriff at Willow Creek. I said the law would be at the end of his road if he kept on it. The words worked enough. Men like him understand a boundary when it wears a badge, not always when it wears another man's calm. He spat, tugged at the lines, and took his wagon off in a stink of sweat and foolishness, shoving the air aside like it owed him something. When he was a smear between 2 heat shimmers, I let a breath out that had been caged too long in me, and the woman did the same. For a moment we stood there as if the land had been emptied of every sound but our breathing. "Can you stand, ma'am?" I asked. She nodded, and I set her down careful. "The way you lower a book you ought never to have dropped." She straightened, retied her scarf, and gathered herself with a dignity the dust could not touch. Up close I could see not just what had been done to her, but what had survived it. Some souls are built like riverbeds, shaped by every season, still holding water. She looked at my mare with interest, and then at the horizon, measuring distance. "Where are you headed?" I asked. "Anywhere that is not where I have been," she said. Her voice had a raw edge to it, but it carried steady. I told her my name then, the whole of it, because a name is an honest thing to give a stranger at the edge of a day. She gave me hers, and it fit her. Lillian James. There was a grace to it, and a plainness, and I kept the sound of it in my mouth a heartbeat longer than manners called for. "Willow Creek is an hour," I said. "There's a sheriff there who minds his work. There's a boarding house with clean sheets, and a woman who will set a plate in front of you and not ask more than your first name until you are ready to say the second. If you take my horse, I can walk it. If you ride pillion, I can keep a hand on the reins and a look on the road." She studied me as if I were a trail map pinned to a wall, reading not just the paths, but the gaps between them. Then she did the first brave thing I ever saw her do that day, which was not a jump. She stepped forward, took my sleeve lightly, and said, "I would be obliged if you would ride with me." The words were plain. The courage inside them was not. I swung into the saddle and held a hand for her. She placed her boot in mine and rose with the trust of someone who has decided that trust is a coin she will spend again. When she settled in behind me, her palms rested a moment on the small of my back, not clinging, only stating that she was there. Dulcie set off with a gentle start, and we turned toward the creek where cottonwoods keep their own kind of counsel. The sun slid lower until it was a red coin balanced on the rim of the earth. The desert gathered itself for night. We rode quiet, but inside that quiet, there was a sound I recognized, the same one a ranch house makes when a window long stuck finally opens to air. We made the hour in 50 minutes because hope will do that to a pace. When the first lights of Willow Creek showed, small and yellow, as if someone had cupped their hands around flame, Lillian let a breath go that sounded like a prayer, and nothing like one. I felt it reach my spine the way warm water finds a man's bones after a long cold day. The road widened and steadied. Voices carried from the livery, and a fiddle from somewhere down the street tried a few notes of a tune it would decide on later. I thought of my father and the kitchen and the boy who had stood between two storms and called himself a wall. I thought of the weight of a fallen person and the surprise of catching them. I thought of the new rope coiled on my horn and how some knots are meant to hold and some are meant to be cut. I rode us straight to Sheriff Buchanan's office because the first rule of a hard day is that you take the honest steps first. The sheriff came out onto the boardwalk with his coffee and his careful eyes, and I opened my mouth to tell him a story that had begun before I was born and would keep beginning until men learn better. Lillian stood beside me, shoulders square, her scarf tied neat, and the light fell on her face in a way that hid nothing and forgave nothing. I said my piece, and then I let the night carry the rest. The sheriff listened the way old hounds listen, head tilted, not saying much. His name was Buchanan, a square man with eyes that had seen every kind of trouble and no longer found surprise in it. He took in the woman beside me, the dust on her hem, the way she held her chin, defiant and afraid at the same time. He didn't ask what kind of man would strike his wife. He'd seen enough to know the answer didn't matter. What mattered was what came after. He said we'd best sit a spell, so we went inside. The air in his office smelled of coffee, gun oil, and paper. There was a single lamp burning low, throwing the kind of light that makes everything seem smaller, even pain. Lillian sat on the edge of a chair, hands clasped. I stood by the door, because that's what you do when you've been on the trail too long. You give space, and you stay ready. Buchanan took his time writing a few notes in his ledger, then leaned back. You did right bringing her here, he said. We'll send word down the trail. If that man shows again, we'll have questions for him. Lillian looked at him straight. There's nothing down that trail I want to see again, Sheriff. He nodded slow, like he was marking the end of something sacred. Then you won't. I stayed quiet. The weight of the day was settling into my shoulders, dull and heavy. When Buchanan turned to me, I knew the question before he spoke it. You taking her in? I don't rightly know, I said. She don't know me, and I ain't one for charity that turns to gossip. Fair enough, he said, but there's Mrs. Holloway's place. She's got rooms clean and cheap, and she's a friend to the law. She'll see to her until she's steady. He turned back to Lillian. You ride with him, ma'am. He's got a reputation for not talking more than necessary, and that's worth something. She rose, thanked him soft, and followed me out. The night air felt cleaner than I deserved. The sky was wide and star-pocked, the kind of black that makes a man remember how small he is. I helped her onto Dulcie again, and we rode the short stretch to Holloway's boarding house at the far edge of town. There was lamplight behind the curtains and the smell of yeast bread cooling. Mrs. Holloway met us on the porch, her apron dusted with flour and her face lined in the way kind women's faces get when they've spent years keeping others alive. She looked Lillian over, then me, then nodded, like she'd already decided who was who in the story. You'll stay here, miss, she said to Lillian. And you, she said to me, can rest easy knowing she's under a roof that don't leak and in hands that don't shake. I left her there. She didn't look back when I turned toward the livery, but I didn't expect her to. Some women need to feel the door close behind them before they can believe it's truly shut. I walked slow, letting my boots scuff the dirt, the night's quiet wrapping around me. It wasn't peace, not exactly, but it was close enough to make me remember what peace had once felt like. The next few days passed in the kind of silence only small towns know. I rode fences, mended what winter had broken, and tried not to think about the blue of her dress when she jumped from that wagon. But the mind has its own trails, and mine kept circling back to her. By the third day, I found myself at the cafe after chores, nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Through the window, I saw her, Lillian, standing beside Mrs. Holloway at the dry goods counter. She was dressed in a plain calico dress, her hair braided neat. She moved careful, like every gesture had been measured and earned. Mrs. Holloway said something and Lillian laughed. It was a small sound, but it carried through the glass like sunlight on water. I turned my cup in my hands and told myself to leave it be. That evening, the sheriff stopped by my place with news. He said the husband had been seen heading east, angry and alone, cursing every mile. I reckon he's gone for good, Trim, he said. I still keep an eye out. Men like that don't always stay gone. I nodded. I'll keep a look. He studied me a moment. You're a good one, Cade. Don't go thinking you ain't. After he left, I sat on the porch a long time, watching the stars drift over the ridgeline. The air was cool enough to smell of sage. Sometimes I think loneliness has a sound, faint and steady, like wind moving through dry grass. That night, it sounded a lot like my name whispered by someone I'd never expect to know it. The next Sunday, Willow Creek held a church social, the kind that draws everyone, ranchers, widows, kids with faces sticky from pie. I wasn't much for gatherings, but Buchanan stopped me on the street and said, "You should come. There'll be fiddle music and Holloway's bread. That ought to count for something." So I went. I cleaned the dust off my boots and wore the shirt that hadn't seen town since last harvest. When I got there, the hall smelled of coffee, cinnamon, and sawdust floors. Lillian was there helping arrange dishes along a table. She looked up once, saw me, and smiled just enough to undo a man's composure. I tipped my hat, and that seemed to please her. The night moved slow in the best way. The music was easy, the talk soft. I stood near the doorway with a plate I didn't touch and watched her laugh with Mrs. Holloway. When she caught my eye again, she walked over. "I never thanked you proper," she said, "for catching me." "You did," I told her, "when you started living again." She looked down, then back up. "I'm trying. That's all any of us do." We stood there, silence thick with things unsaid. Then the fiddler changed tune, slower now, and couples began to step into rhythm. She hesitated, then offered her hand. "Will you?" she asked. I hadn't danced in years, not since a summer before the war when my mother still believed I might settle down. But there's a way some moments feel like second chances, and you don't turn those down. I took her hand. It fit easy in mine, light but certain. We moved slow, her head near my shoulder, her breath warm with cinnamon and fear easing into peace. The lantern light flickered across her face, and I thought maybe this was what healing looked like when it finally found form. When the song ended, she stepped back, eyes shining. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For reminding me the world ain't all bad." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. Sometimes words spoil a good silence. I walked her back to Mrs. Holloway's afterward. The night softened around us. The moon was a silver coin caught between clouds. When we reached the porch, she paused. "You have a kind heart, Mr. Cade," she said. "Kindness don't cost near as much as cruelty," I answered. She smiled at that, and it stayed with me long after the door closed behind her. That night, I dreamed of the desert, the same stretch of road where I'd found her, only this time there was no wagon, no shouting, just a woman standing barefoot in the dust, looking at the sky as if she were free at last. I woke before dawn, the dream still sitting on my chest like a weight that didn't hurt, just reminded. The days turned to weeks. Spring slid toward summer, and the land began to green where water dared. I saw Lillian often, not by plan, but by the way small towns make paths cross. Sometimes she'd wave from the porch. Sometimes she'd just nod as we passed in the street. Each time, it felt like the world was learning how to breathe a little easier. One afternoon, I found myself helping Buchanan repair the corral fence behind his office. He mentioned Lillian had been asking about work. Honest work, not charity. Mrs. Holloway's place was full, and the cafe could use hands. "She's making her own way," he said. "Seems you set her on the right trail." I didn't answer. Truth is, I wasn't sure who had set who on the right trail. I only knew that since that day in the dust, my world had tilted a degree towards something better. That night, as I rode home, the sunset burned low and red. I thought of her laughter, her courage, the way her eyes had met mine without flinching. Somewhere between the hills, a coyote called, and the sound stretched out like a thread between the past and the now. I let it pull me forward. Some men spend their lives looking for gold, some for peace. Me, I reckon I'd stumbled onto something rarer. Hope, shaped like a woman who once jumped from a wagon and landed in my arms. It was near the end of June when trouble came again. The air had that still weight it gets before heat turns to thunder, when even the birds forget their own names. I was in the north pasture, mending a split rail, when Buchanan rode out to find me. His horse was lathered white, and the dust on his coat said he'd been riding fast. "Cade," he called before he'd even reined in. "Got word from Lubbock way. That husband of hers, Randall Wilson, he's coming back through." The words dropped between us like a stone into a well that hadn't seen water in years. I set down my hammer slow. "You sure?" "Sure as a wanted notice. Drunk, broke, telling anyone who'll listen that he's got business in Willow Creek." He looked at me, waiting for the part I hadn't said yet. I nodded once. Then I'll see to it he finishes that business without hurting her again. Buchanan sighed, rubbing the sweat from his brow. "Don't go looking for a fight, Cade. Law'll handle it." "The law's you," I said, "and you just rode 6 miles to tell me." He didn't argue. Maybe he saw in my face what the wind had been carving there for years, a line a man crosses once and can't uncross. That evening, I saddled Dulcie and rode toward town. The sun had melted into the plains, leaving only that dull copper glow along the horizon. When I reached Holloway's place, I dismounted quiet, tied Dulcie at the hitch, and walked up the porch. Lillian was sitting there, mending something with a small needle, her hair unbound for once, spilling like river silt across her shoulders. She looked up when she heard my boots on the step. "Evening, Mr. Cade," she said, voice soft but steady. "You look like a man carrying a storm behind his eyes." I tipped my hat, took it off, and held it against my chest. "There's word, Lillian, he's coming." The needle paused in her hand. She didn't flinch, didn't cry, just looked past me toward the fading light where the first stars were shivering awake. "I figured he might," she said after a while. "Men like him don't leave clean. They circle like buzzards, but I won't run again." I took a step closer. "You won't have to." She smiled then, tired, honest. "You talk like a man who plans on standing in front of me, Mr. Cade. Don't do that. I done with men fighting over what's left of me." "It ain't fighting over," I said. "It's standing with." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The night came on full, crickets starting their song. Inside, Holloway hummed a hymn under her breath. The sound of home and safety wrapped around that porch, thin but strong. Finally, Lillian nodded. "All right, She said, "Oh, man, but if he comes, we face him together." I sat down beside her. The boards creaked under our weight, same as they had for 100 tired souls before us. "You ever been scared so long you forgot how to feel safe?" she asked. "Every day for the first 20 years of my life," I said. "My father had hands quick as thunder and slower to calm. When he died, folks said he went to the good Lord. I reckon the Lord didn't thank him much for that gift." She let out a breath that wasn't quite laughter, wasn't quite sorrow. "Guess we both got ghosts then." "Seems so," I said. We sat there till the lamp burned low inside. I could feel her shoulder close to mine, the faint scent of soap and linen. It was a peace carved out of fear, fragile but real. By morning, I'd made my choice. I went to Buchanan, told him I'd take watch at the edge of town. He nodded, didn't try to stop me. Sometimes a lawman knows when justice rides in plain clothes. That night, the storm broke. Lightning crawled across the sky, thunder rumbling like God shifting in his sleep. I waited near the cottonwoods, rifle laid across my knees, Dulcie tied close. The road stretched east like a black vein, and before long I saw him, Randall Wilson, slouched in the saddle, a shadow moving wrong against the dark. He saw me before I spoke. "You Cade," he called, voice slurred but mean. "That cowboy who thinks he can steal what's mine." "She was never yours," I said. He spat. "You don't know a damn thing about it." I stood then, slow. I know what I saw. A woman jumping from a wagon like hell was driving it. I know what kind of man makes her do that. He laughed, but it wasn't humor. It was venom trying to remember its shape. "You think you're her savior?" "No, just a man tired of seeing another one raise a hand to what he ought to cherish." Lightning flashed, quick and white. In that blink, I saw his gun hand twitch. I didn't wait to see it again. My rifle barked once, sharp and final. When the echo faded, Randall Wilson lay still in the mud. Rain started falling, thin and cold. I walked to him, knelt, and turned his face toward the sky. He looked younger dead, smaller too. I said a prayer for him, the kind that don't ask for mercy, just an end to circles. By the time Buchanan arrived, the rain had washed most of the blood away. He looked from the body to me and didn't bother asking what happened. He just sighed. "Was it clean?" "Clean as it could be," I said. He nodded. "Then I'll write it that way." When it was done, I rode back to town. Lillian was waiting on the porch, a lantern trembling in her hand. She didn't ask, and I didn't tell. She just reached out, touched my sleeve, and said, "You're shaking." "Been holding steady too long," I said. She took the lantern from me, set it down, and placed both hands over mine until the tremor passed. "You can stop now," she whispered. "We're both allowed to stop." The rain softened, the night opened, and I felt something break loose inside me. Not pain, not relief, just space. For the first time in years, I slept through till dawn. Morning came gray and slow, the way mornings do after a storm. The air held the smell of wet dust and cedar, and somewhere a rooster crowed, like it had survived the end of the world. I rose from my cot at Buchanan's office, stretched my back till it cracked, and went to the window. The street was slick and shining, wagons making soft grooves through the mud. Folks moved quiet that day, as if the rain had washed their tempers clean. Randall Wilson's body had been buried at the edge of town before sunrise. Buchanan did it himself, Said a man deserves at least that much dignity, even if he'd spent his living days without any. I didn't go to the burial. Some debts are settled best in silence. I stepped outside and found Dulcie waiting, her coat dark with dew. She flicked her ears when she saw me, and I rubbed the ridge between them. "You did fine," I told her. "You always do." She pressed her head against my shoulder as if she knew the weight sitting there. By mid-morning, I found myself walking the 2 blocks to Mrs. Holloway's boarding house. Not because I had business there, but because the quiet was too wide without her voice in it. When I reached the porch, I stopped short. Lillian was sitting there again, this time with her hair braided, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold. The light from inside caught her face, soft and worn, but not broken. She looked up and managed a small smile. "You didn't have to come." "I know," I said, "no, but sometimes a man does the thing he can't explain." She gestured to the empty chair beside her. "You might as well sit then." I did. For a long minute we just watched the road. Children were splashing in puddles near the church steps, their laughter carrying easy on the wind. "You know," she said, voice steady but low, "I thought I'd feel something different, relief maybe, freedom. But I don't. I just feel quiet." "That's what freedom sounds like sometimes," I said, and she nodded, eyes distant. "He took a lot from me. Years, maybe parts of who I was. But he didn't take all of it. I think I'm just now figuring what's left." I leaned back, arms crossed. "You'll find it. You're tougher than the land itself." That made her laugh, soft and real. Tough's just another word for scared but moving anyway. We sat that way till the sun climbed high, until Mrs. Holloway came out with 2 plates of cornbread and a look that said we best eat before it got cold. We did, grateful for the small grace of something warm and ordinary. When I stood to leave, Lillian stopped me. "Hayes," she said. It was the first time she'd used my first name. "I don't know what comes next. I don't even know where I belong anymore." I turned to face her fully. "Belonging ain't a place, Lillian, it's people. Sometimes just one." She didn't answer right away, but her gaze lingered long enough that I felt the words take root between us. I tipped my hat and walked off before the silence could change into something either of us wasn't ready to name. Days passed, each one like a slow breath after a long illness. I worked the ranch, helped Buchanan with a few stray cattle he'd been holding for auction, and came to town now and again for supplies. Every time I saw her, sometimes hanging linens, sometimes sweeping the porch, sometimes reading by the window, with her lips moving along the words. Each time I thought maybe I'd say something different, but the truth was I liked the quiet we'd built. Some things grow better when you don't reach for them too soon. It was late July when Mrs. Holloway cornered me outside the general store. "You're a fool, Hayes Cade," she said naively. "Ma'am, you heard me. That woman's starting to think you don't care." I blinked. "She ain't said that. She wouldn't. She's too proud. But you're the one she waits for when a wagon passes by, the one she looks toward every time a boot hits the porch. Don't make her wait for a ghost." I didn't answer. Couldn't really. The truth was simple enough. I've been waiting too. Waiting to feel worthy of something good after years of dust and guilt. But maybe the waiting had become its own kind of cowardice. That evening, I went to see her. The air was golden with the last light, and cicadas were singing like they meant to outlive the sun. She was sitting on the steps, sewing a tear in her sleeve. When she saw me, she smiled, not surprised. "I heard you might be looking for work," I said, clearing my throat. "I could use a hand at the ranch. Fences, cooking, whatever suits you. Pays fair." She tilted her head. "You could find any hand in town for that." True, but none that make the place feel less empty. For a moment she didn't move. Then she set her sewing aside, stood and said, "All right, I'll come, but only if I earn my keep. Wouldn't have it any other way." We rode out the next morning. She sat behind me, same as that first night, but the air between us was different, warmer somehow, steady. When we reached the ranch, she climbed down, looked around at the wide stretch of land and the barn leaning a little to one side. "It's quiet here," she said. "Too quiet sometimes. Then maybe I'll change that." She did. Within a week, the place began to feel alive again. She filled the kitchen with the smell of biscuits and wood smoke, planted flowers along the porch rail, scolded me when I forgot to eat. Even Dulcie seemed to like her, nudging her pockets for apples. Nights, we'd sit by the fire, her mending or reading, me carving or just listening. Sometimes she'd hum a tune, soft and aimless, and I'd think how peace sneaks up on a man like that, quiet as dawn, sure as dust. One night, after a long day branding calves, I found her standing by the corral, watching lightning far off on the horizon. Her face was calm, thoughtful. "You ever think about leaving?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "Used to. Every day. Now I think about staying." The wind tugged at her braid, and in the flicker of distant stormlight, I saw her differently. Not as the woman I caught from the wagon, but as the one who'd caught me in return. I wanted to say it then, but the words felt too heavy for the night air. Instead I said, "Storm's moving in." She nodded. "Then we'd best stay close." And we did. That storm never reached us. It wandered north and spent itself against the hills, leaving only the scent of rain in the wind. But it stayed in my mind for days after. Maybe because storms have a way of reminding a man that everything solid can turn to thunder and light in a blink. The ranch settled into a rhythm, the kind that fills the long spaces between sunrise and supper. Lillian took to the work like she'd been born to it. She fixed the hinge on the chicken coop door, mended harness leather, even learned how to throw feed to keep the hens from fighting. Sometimes I'd catch her talking to them like they were old friends, soft and easy. That sound, her voice against the quiet, was enough to make the place feel lived in again. We didn't talk much about the past. She never said Randall's name, and I never asked. But the past has its own ways of speaking, even when you keep your mouth shut. Sometimes I'd find her standing still, staring off toward the horizon, like she was trying to measure the distance between who she'd been and who she was now. I knew that look. I'd worn it myself once. One evening, we were sitting by the fire after supper. The light was low and the smell of pine smoke hung heavy in the room. She was darning a shirt of mine that had seen too many fences. Her hands moved steady, sure. I watched her a long time before I realized I was staring. "What?" she asked, not looking up. "I was just thinking," I said, how quick you made this place your own." She smiled without stopping her needle. "Guess I needed a roof to put my ghosts under." "Don't we all?" I said. She looked at me then, her eyes catching the firelight. "You ever put yours to rest?" I thought about it. then shook my head. Some nights I think I have. Then I wake up and find him sitting at the foot of my bed waiting on coffee. That made her laugh. A real one this time. The kind that starts low and surprises both of you. She leaned back, setting the mending aside. You should tell me about them sometime. The ghosts. Maybe I will, I said. We talked a while longer. About small things mostly. The weather, the calves, how Dulcie had taken to sleeping under the porch when thunder rolled. But beneath it all was something quieter. Something building like a slow fire that neither of us dared name. It was near midnight when she finally stood. "Good night, Hayes," she said. "Night, Lillian." I watched her go down the short hall to her room. When her door closed, the cabin felt too big again. The kind of emptiness you can't fix with wood or warmth. The next morning, the world woke gold. The rain had left the earth soft, and the sky was clear as polished glass. Lillian was already up, hair tied back, sleeves rolled. She was hanging laundry behind the house, humming that tune again, the one that had no name but always found the right note. I saddled Dulcie, planning to check the south fence, but before I mounted, I stopped. She was standing there, sunlight catching her hair, the sheet in her hands billowing like a sail. It hit me then, plain as a sunrise. She wasn't just passing through my life. She'd become part of it. That thought followed me all day, through the fence lines and the creek bed, through the hours that smelled of dust and horse sweat. When I rode back at dusk, I found her waiting on the porch, 2 cups of coffee steaming beside her. "Hard day?" she asked. "Good kind of hard," I said, taking the cup. "How about you?" I fixed the hinge on the pantry door. I grinned. "You mean the hinge I was planning to fix for the past 6 months?" "That's the one." We sat in the quiet, sipping our coffee. The sun went down slow, spreading color across the sky like spilled paint. Somewhere, a whippoorwill started calling. She turned toward me, her face soft in the last light. "Hayes," she said, "why'd you never marry?" I let out a breath, long and low. I came close once. She wanted a life that didn't have dirt under its nails. I reckon she made the right choice. Some men are built for town life. I'm built for the wind. She studied me for a moment, then looked back toward the horizon. The wind can be lonely. "It can," I said, "but sometimes it carries a voice that makes the miles easier." She didn't answer, but I saw her lips curve just a little. The kind of smile you don't see unless you're looking straight for it. That night, when I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. The roof creaked as it cooled, and outside the wind moved through the cottonwoods, whispering. I thought about her laughter, the steadiness in her hands, the way her voice filled the house like it had always belonged there. I thought about the way she said my name. A man can spend his whole life trying to find peace and not realize he's already living in it. The next morning, I found a note on the table, just a scrap of paper folded neat. Went to town for supplies. Back by noon. I smiled when I read it. Simple words, but they meant something more. Trust. She didn't feel the need to ask permission, and she didn't fear leaving. She was her own again, and somehow I felt proud. When noon came and went without her, I didn't worry. Not at first. Roads get long. Conversations get longer. But when the sun started to lean west, I saddled Dulcie. I found her wagon 2 miles out of town, wheels stuck in a rut. She was standing beside it, hands on her hips, laughing at herself. "I was just about to walk," she said when she saw me. I climbed down, grinning. And leave your flour and coffee for the coyotes. Not a chance. We freed the wheel together, the two of us covered in dust and sweat, laughing like fools. When it finally came loose, she stumbled into me, nearly fell. My hands caught her by the waist. For a second, neither of us moved. The wind died. The world went still. Her breath brushed my neck, and I felt her heartbeat where our chests met. "Thank you," she whispered. "Always," I said. She stepped back first, cheeks flushed. "We should get back before dark." "Yeah," I said, but my voice had gone rough. We didn't talk much on the ride home. Didn't have to. The silence was thick, full of everything we'd both been avoiding. When we reached the porch, she climbed down slow, turned to look at me. "Hayes," she said, voice soft as twilight, "some things are worth waiting for." Then she walked inside, leaving me standing there, the wind curling around my boots, the stars beginning to wake. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the porch until the moon had crossed half the sky, listening to the frogs down by the creek and the faint rustle of her moving inside. Sometimes I'd hear her footsteps, soft against the floorboards, or the sound of her chair creaking when she turned a page. The house had never sounded so alive. The next morning dawned red and cloudless. Heat shimmered on the horizon before the day had properly begun. Lillian was already in the yard, gathering eggs with her sleeves rolled and her hair tied back. She looked up when I came out. "Morning," she said, voice bright and steady. "Morning," I answered, taking the basket from her. "You sleep?" "Well enough. You?" "Didn't try much." She smiled faintly, shading her eyes. "You think too much, Hayes Cade." "Maybe," I said. "Maybe not enough about the right things." She didn't press it. That was one of the things I'd come to admire about her. She knew when to let silence do the work. We spent the morning in the fields, mending a section of fence that had taken to leaning. The sun climbed high and hard, and by noon both of us were dusted white with sweat and earth. When we stopped for water, she looked out toward the far hills. "You ever wonder if there's more than this? More than a good stretch of land and a sound horse," I said. "Can't say I've needed much else." She turned toward me, eyes narrowed against the light. "That's not what I mean. I mean more than what we're given, more than just surviving it." I took off my hat, wiped my forehead with the back of my arm. "Once in a while," I said. "But I figure the trick is learning to be grateful for what don't leave." She studied me a moment, then nodded. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I've just spent too long learning to run. Then maybe it's time to rest." The rest of the day moved quiet. The air was thick, the kind that smells like rain even when it won't come. We worked until the light faded, then cleaned up, ate supper, and sat out front again. She brought out 2 cups of coffee, black as the night around us. "I used to hate the dark," she said suddenly. "Couldn't stand not knowing what was out there. But now, it don't feel so bad." "Dark's just the other side of light," I said. "No," she smiled. "You always got an answer, don't you?" "Not always the right one." She looked at me a long time, her gaze calm but searching. "You ever think about starting over, Hayes? Not as a rancher, not as a man fixing other folks' fences, but as something more?" I turned her question over in my head. The frogs had gone quiet. Even the night breeze seemed to pause, listening. "Starting over takes 2, I said finally. "Maybe it don't," she said, her voice soft. "Maybe it just takes courage." The next day, she rode into town alone. Said she wanted to see Buchanan about some papers, things she needed to make right with the court now that Randall was gone. I didn't ask what they were. She deserved her independence, and I respected that. But I won't lie. I watched the road long after she disappeared into the distance. The house felt hollow without her. By sundown, she hadn't come back. I saddled Dulcie, uneasy, and started toward town. The sky was bruising into purple, the last light burning low behind the ridge. I found her near the bridge just outside Willow Creek, sitting on a log by the river, boots off, her feet in the water. "You all right?" I asked. She didn't turn, just nodded. Needed to think a while. I dismounted and sat beside her. The water was low from the heat, moving slow and clear. She held a folded paper in her lap. "What's that?" I asked. She handed it to me. "Divorce papers. Sheriff said they'll file 'em in the county seat next week. Randall Wilson's name will be a ghost on paper after that." I looked at the ink, still smudged from her fingers. "You sure you're ready?" She took a breath. "I've been ready for years. I just didn't have the chance till now." The frogs started again, and the river kept whispering along its stones. She leaned back on her hands and looked up at the sky. "Funny thing, Hayes. I thought freedom would feel loud, like a gunshot. Turns out it's quiet, real quiet." "That's how you know it's real," I said. She turned toward me then, close enough that the scent of her hair mixed with the river air. "And what about you? You think you'll ever start living again, instead of just remembering how?" I didn't answer right away. The truth was, I didn't know. There's a kind of living that starts the moment a man lets go of his guilt. I hadn't quite learned that yet, but I looked at her, at the way the moonlight touched her cheek, and I thought maybe I could learn. We rode home in silence. Halfway there, she leaned her head lightly against my back. The contact was small, barely there, but I felt it like a spark in the dark. When we reached the porch, she slid off the horse and turned to me. "You ever get tired of being alone?" she asked. "Every damn day," I said before I could stop myself. She nodded, as if that was all she needed to hear. Then she went inside, leaving the door open long enough for me to see the lamplight flicker against her hair. That night, I didn't sleep again. The wind shifted, bringing the scent of sage through the open window. I lay there listening to it and thought about how strange it was. How a man can spend half his life expecting the worst and then find himself praying for something good to stay. The next morning, she came to breakfast with her hair loose, wearing the old blue dress from that church social months back. "I'm going into town again," she said, buttering a biscuit. "Mrs. Holloway's holding a community meeting about the new schoolhouse. They need donations." I nodded. "You taking the wagon?" "No," she said. "I thought I'd walk. It's a fine day for it." "Then I'll walk with you." She didn't argue, just smiled, small and warm. We took the long road that followed the creek, the sun flickering through the cottonwoods. Every so often she'd stop to pick wildflowers. By the time we reached town, her hands were full of color. She handed me one small bloom, a yellow daisy, and said, "For your table." I tucked it into my vest pocket, feeling foolish and young. We parted ways at the general store, but before she went inside, she touched my arm. "You ever think maybe the good things we get come late on purpose?" she asked. "Why's that?" so we learn how to keep 'em when they finally show up." She smiled, then disappeared into the crowd. I stood there a long time, the daisy warm against my chest, and thought maybe she was right. By the time summer gave itself over to autumn, the cottonwoods along the creek had turned the color of old gold. The wind changed too, cooler now, carrying the smell of smoke from town and the faint tang of apples from somewhere far up the valley. Days grew shorter, nights grew kinder. Lillian stayed at the ranch more often. She took to writing in the evenings, scraps of paper spread across the kitchen table, her head bent under lamplight. Sometimes I'd hear the scratch of her pencil while I sat on the porch cleaning tack. It was a sound I'd come to look forward to, like the murmur of a river that never dries out. We live quiet, but not the empty kind of quiet, the good kind, the kind that fills a man's lungs instead of hollowing them. Still, there were moments when I'd catch her staring out toward the horizon again, eyes far away, and I'd know that freedom had its own loneliness. One evening, she found me in the barn brushing down Dulcie. The mare's coat gleamed copper under the lantern light. Lillian leaned against the stall door, watching me. "You ever think about leaving, Hayes?" she asked. "Leaving what?" "This place, this life. Starting new somewhere else." I kept brushing, slow strokes. "I used to. Thought if I rode far enough, I'd get clear of my mistakes. Turns out a man carries them same as his shadow. Don't matter how far you ride, the sun just changes where it falls." She smiled, a small sad curve of the mouth. "That sounds like something you'd say." "It's something I learned the hard way," I said. She came closer then, reached out to stroke Dulcie's mane. "I think about it sometimes, not leaving you or the ranch. Just wondering if there's still a piece of me out there that I ain't found yet." "There's no shame in wondering," I said. "World's too big to stay still, but if you ever go looking, I'll just make sure you got a home to come back to." Her hand stilled on Dulcie's neck. "You mean this place?" "I mean here," I said, tapping my chest, "wherever you decide that is." She met my eyes then, and something unspoken passed between us, soft, sure, and a little frightening. She nodded once, then turned to go, her dress brushing against the straw. That night, I didn't hear her writing. The house was still, except for the wind and the creak of the old boards. I lay awake, thinking how strange it was that peace could hurt more than pain, because it reminded you what you'd been missing. The next morning, frost clung to the porch railings. She was already outside, bundled in my old jacket, feeding the hens. I poured coffee and watched her through the window. The sun caught her hair and turned it to fire. She caught me staring and laughed. "You're worse than the rooster," she said. "Maybe I'm just keeping time," I said. She rolled her eyes, but her cheeks flushed pink. "Well, keep it quieter, you'll scare the hens." We spent that day in town helping with the new schoolhouse, Buchanan hammering nails, Holloway baking pies, Lillian painting window frames a pale shade of blue. Watching her with the townsfolk made me realize something. She'd built her own name here, not as the woman who ran from a wagon, but as someone folks looked to. Later, when the work was done, we sat on the church steps, sharing a bottle of cider someone had passed around. The air smelled of wood and autumn. "You ever miss the road?" she asked me. "Sometimes," I said, "when the night's too quiet, and I start thinking about all the things I ain't fixed." And have you fixed any?" "Maybe one or two," I said, glancing her way. She smiled into her cup. "I think you're better at it than you believe." We rode home slow, under a half moon. Halfway there, she started humming again. I didn't recognize the tune, but I found myself whistling along. The rhythm of the horse, the melody, the smell of sage and smoke, it all fit together, like the world had finally remembered its shape. When we reached the ranch, she slipped off Dulcie and stood beside me in the dark. "You ever think we're just ghosts of who we used to be?" she asked. "Maybe," I said, "but even ghosts can build something new if they stay long enough." She looked up at me then, her breath visible in the chill. "What if I stayed?" "You already have," I said. She smiled, and this time she didn't look away. Her hand brushed mine, tentative but certain, and the air between us seemed to hum. Then she stepped closer, rested her head against my chest, and whispered. I was scared I'd never feel safe again. "You are now," I said, "and you ain't alone." We stood like that until the cold drove us inside. That night she didn't go to her own room. She sat beside me by the fire until the embers died, her head resting against my shoulder. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The silence had its own language. When she finally rose, she pressed a kiss to my temple. "Good night, Hayes," she said, barely more than breath. "Night, Lillian." Long after she was gone to bed, I sat there watching the fire fade to coals. I thought about how every man gets one chance to set down his burdens and call it home. I reckon mine had just walked through my door months ago, and I've been too slow to see it. The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of the coming winter. It whispered through the cracks in the cabin, low and constant, like a song I'd known once, but forgotten the words to. When I finally climbed into bed, I slept without dreams. Winter came early that year. The first frost never left the grass, and the mornings turned so cold, the horse's breath hung silver in the air. Smoke curled from our chimney most of the day, the kind that smells like cedar and comfort. Lillian took to wearing my old wool coat when she went out to the barn, sleeves too long, him brushing her boots. I told her it made her look like she'd been part of the land all her life. She smiled at that and said maybe she had been, just took her a while to find her way back to it. We spent the short days working together, and the long nights reading aloud by the fire. She'd found a book of poems in town, torn cover, half the pages loose. The words were plain, but hit deep. Sometimes she'd read one, then go quiet, and I'd watch her face soften in the firelight. One evening, she read a line that hung between us. "Some hearts heal not by forgetting, but by belonging." She looked up, eyes glinting. "You believe that?" I poked the fire with the iron. "Don't see why not. Seems true enough. Belonging's the first thing a man loses when the world breaks him." She nodded slow. "And you ever belong anywhere?" I took a long breath. "Used to think I did. Had a ranch east of here once, before the drought. Thought work and pride were enough. Turns out you can't build a life out of sweat alone. It dries up too fast." She watched me a while, then set the book aside. "You don't talk about her much," she said quietly. I looked up surprised. Who?" "The woman you almost married." Her voice wasn't jealous, just gentle, curious. I leaned back in my chair, the firelight flickering across the ceiling. "She was good," I said. "Better than I deserved back then. Wanted a life with windows and neighbors. I wanted the open sky. So she took one road, I took another. Don't blame her none. We were both just trying to find air we could breathe. And did you? I looked at her then, long enough for the silence to answer. Maybe I just found it now. She blushed, looking away, but she didn't reach for the book again. We sat like that until the fire burned low, the world outside soft with snow. Somewhere beyond the hills, a coyote called, a long, mournful note that sounded less like hunger and more like memory. That night, she fell asleep in the chair beside me, head tilted, hair catching the last ember light. I draped a blanket over her and watched the steady rise and fall of her breath. There was peace in that sight, the kind I thought a man like me wasn't meant to have. Morning brought sunlight sharp as glass. I woke to the smell of biscuits and coffee. Lillian was already at the stove, humming. She looked over her shoulder. Storm passed, she said. Looks that way. Buchanan came by early, she added. He said the county clerk sent word. My papers came through. I paused, mug halfway to my mouth. So it's done. She nodded, turning back to the pan. It's done. The words should have sounded like an ending. Instead, they felt like the start of something I didn't yet know how to name. After breakfast, we walked the pasture fence together. The snow glittered in the light, and the air bit clean through wool. At the far end, where the land dropped toward the creek, she stopped. You think the past ever really lets go? She asked. No, I said, but it gets quieter. You just learn to talk softer around it. She smiled faintly. Then maybe it's time I stop whispering. She turned to face me, eyes clear as the winter sky. I haze I've spent years letting life happen to me. I'd like to start choosing it. I felt my throat tighten. And what would you choose? Her voice was steady, low. This. You. If you'll have me. For a moment, all I could hear was the wind in the grass, the river moving slow beneath its skin of ice. Then I reached for her hand. Lillian, you saved me long before I ever caught you, I said. She laughed softly, that kind of laugh that sounds like a prayer half answered. We stood there a long while, the sun climbing behind us, the snow giving way beneath our boots. She leaned against me, her head fitting just under my chin. You ever think about what comes next? She asked. Every day, I said, but for once, I don't mind not knowing. That evening, the town gathered for Christmas supper at the church hall. Lillian baked 2 pies, and I brought firewood. There was music, fiddle, banjo, voices raised in something like joy. People smiled at us when we came in together, and for the first time, I didn't feel the weight of eyes. I just felt seen. Halfway through the night, Buchanan clapped me on the shoulder. Didn't think I'd ever see you dance again, Cade, he said. Didn't think I would either, I told him. Guess life ain't done proving me wrong. When we stepped outside later, snow was falling again, gentle as ash. The world was hushed, clean. She slipped her arm through mine. You cold? I asked. No, she said, smiling. Not anymore. We walked home in silence, the kind that means everything's been said. Inside, the fire caught quick. She stood close, rubbing her hands together, and I thought how strange it was that 2 broken paths could ever meet so straight. She turned to me. You still think the wind's meant to keep you moving? I shook my head. Not tonight. And then she kissed me. Soft at first, then sure. The kind of kiss that doesn't ask for tomorrow because it already holds it. When she pulled away, she whispered, that maybe you've found your place. Maybe I have, I said. Outside, the snow kept falling, quiet as grace. Winter stayed long that year. The days came slow and pale, as if the sun had grown shy behind its veil of cold. But the snow kept the world still, and in that stillness, something between us deepened into the kind of peace a man doesn't dare name too quick for fear of breaking it. We built our life one quiet morning at a time. She'd hum while stirring coffee. I'd stack wood by the door, and the cabin filled with small sounds that meant we weren't alone anymore. The silence that used to feel like emptiness now sounded like belonging. When the first thaw came, we took Dulcie down to the creek to drink. The water was quick again. Singing over the stones, Lillian laughed when the mare splashed her boots. That laugh, it's a sound I reckon I'll remember longer than my own heartbeat. You ever think, she said, brushing her hair back, how strange it is to feel safe? Strange, I asked. Like it's borrowed time. I'll still wake some nights thinking I'm back on that wagon. I didn't answer right off. I waded in beside her, let the cold water climb my boots. You're not, I said finally. You're here. That wagon's just a shadow. It can't reach this far. She smiled faintly, but her eyes were distant, somewhere in a past I couldn't follow. I reached out, touched her hand, rough with work and the weather. You ain't gotta forget to move on, I said. You just got to forgive yourself for surviving. That brought her back. She looked at me like she was seeing something steady enough to lean on. You always know what to say, Hayes. I don't, I said to my own, but I know what not to run from. That evening, when the light dropped behind the hills, she came to where I sat on the porch, sharpening a blade. Buchanan came by today, she said. He's looking for someone to teach letters at the new schoolhouse till they can hire proper. You thinking of doing it? I asked. I was, she said. He said it'd only be 2 days a week. I could ride in easy. I smiled. Reckon those children could use someone who knows a bit about starting over. She hesitated. You'd be all right here alone. Been alone most of my life, I said, and that was before I had something to wait for. That made her eyes soften. All right then, I'll do it. From then on, twice a week, she rode into town before dawn, her scarf tucked against the chill, a satchel of books slung behind her. When she came back in the evenings, she carried the smell of chalk and laughter with her. I'd meet her halfway down the road sometimes just to see that look she'd wear, the one of someone who'd remembered her purpose. One evening, she came home later than usual. The sun had long set, and I was starting to think about saddling up when I saw her lantern bobbing down the road. She was singing, quiet, tired, but happy. When she reached the porch, she handed me a folded paper. What's this? I asked. A letter from the children, she said, smiling. They wrote it themselves. I unfolded it under the lamplight. The handwriting was crooked and brave. Thank you, Miss Lillian, for teaching us how to spell the sky. I looked up at her, and she laughed at the expression on my face. They mean describe, she said, but I think I like it better their way. Me too, I said. The days stretched longer after that. Spring crept in soft as forgiveness. Calves were born. The fields turned green, and the smell of lilacs drifted in through the open windows. We found a rhythm that fit, a life made of small mercies, and the work of keeping them. Sometimes, when the moon hung low, She'd sit by the window writing her stories. I'd lie in bed listening to the scratch of her pen and the wind through the pines. The sound felt like a promise, something I hadn't known I'd been waiting for. One night, she set her papers aside and sat at the edge of the bed. "You ever wonder," she asked, "if we were meant to find each other, or if we just happened to cross the same stretch of broken road?" "Both," I said, "but I reckon the good Lord don't waste coincidences." She smiled, reached for my hand. "I never thanked you proper, Hayes, for catching me that day." I turned my hand over in hers, feeling the warmth there. "You jumped," I said. "I just happened to be standing where the fall ended." She looked at me a long time, eyes shining soft in the dark. Then she said, "Maybe it ended there, but it didn't stop." We lay quiet after that, her head on my chest, her breath slow and even. I thought about how a man can live his whole life riding hard against the wind and never realize what he's been chasing is rest. When dawn came, the world outside was new again. The creek ran louder. The air smelled of wet earth. Lillian stirred, half asleep. "Hayes," she whispered, "Ma, you ever think this is all too good to last?" I brushed her hair from her face. "Every day. That's why I don't take a breath of it for granted." She smiled without opening her eyes. "That's a fine way to live." "Only way I know." Later that morning, Buchanan rode up with news. One of the ranches down south had burned. A lightning strike, no lives lost. But the story spread quick, reminding the town that even peace can catch fire without warning. That night, I sat outside long after Lillian had gone to bed, watching the smoke from a distant hill fading to the stars. I thought about the way life turns, how one storm passes just to make room for another, how love isn't what saves a man, but what makes him want to be saved. When I finally came in, she stirred and reached for me in her sleep. Her hand found mine, small and certain. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I didn't feel the need to keep watch. By midsummer, the land had turned warm and soft again. The creek ran full, and the fields around the house shimmered with wheat the color of old brass. Life had slowed to something steady. It felt as though time itself had learned to walk beside us instead of ahead. Lillian's schoolwork kept her busy, but the house still carried her touch. Flowers on the table, curtains she'd sewn from scraps, the faint scent of lavender where she stored her papers. I'd come in from the fields at dusk and find her there, half lit by the evening, humming to herself every time. It struck me how quietly love had taken root, how it had asked for nothing except the room to grow. One evening she met me at the gate, her smile wide and a little shy. "I've got something to tell you," she said. I brushed the dust off my hat. "Something good, I hope." She nodded. "I'm expecting." For a moment, the world stilled, like the air itself forgot to move. Then my heart caught up to what she'd said. "You sure?" "Doctor came through town this morning. Said it plain." I laughed then, not loud, but deep, the sound of a man who'd been waiting his whole life to believe in joy. I pulled her close, felt her laughter against my chest. The fields around us whispered with wind, and the sky leaned low, gold spilling across her hair. "You all right?" I asked after a while. "I'm more than all right," she said. "I'm scared, maybe, but not the bad kind." "Then we'll be scared together." That night, we sat on the porch long after the stars came out. The air smelled of earth and lilac. She leaned against me, and I could feel her heartbeat through the thin cotton of her dress. Strong, steady, full of promise. "You ever think," she said softly, "about what kind of world this child's coming into?" "All the time," I said. "But I figure if we raise it to know kindness, that'll be enough." She smiled, tracing a small circle on my sleeve with her finger. "You'll be a good father, Hayes. Only if I've got you reminding me how." The weeks passed in a rhythm of small wonders. She grew quieter, but not withdrawn, more like she was listening to something inside her, some ancient song the rest of us had forgotten. I worked the ranch with a new steadiness. Every fence mended, every gate checked twice. Life took on a weight that wasn't burden, but purpose. One morning, a storm rolled through sudden and mean, the kind that comes fast over the ridge and turns day to night. Lillian was in the barn feeding Dulcie when the thunder cracked. I ran out to her, rain slicing sideways, the air electric. "You all right?" I shouted. She nodded, brushing hair from her face. I just startled her. "Oh, she's fine." We stood there, rain drumming on the roof, the air thick with the smell of hay and lightning. She looked at me and smiled through the downpour. "Seems we always find each other in storms," she said. "Maybe that's where we were meant to find each other," I said. When the rain eased, we stepped outside. The world was washed clean, every leaf shining. She took my hand, and for a long moment we just stood there, breathing in the smell of new earth. The months that followed felt like borrowed light. She taught less as the cold came back, and I worked slower, careful not to let her lift more than she should. Buchanan stopped by often, bringing news, jokes, advice I didn't ask for but took anyway. The town seemed smaller somehow, closer. On a December night, the first snow fell again. Lillian woke me before dawn, her voice calm but firm. "It's time," she said. By midday, the storm outside had quieted, and a cry rose soft and new from inside the cabin. A daughter, small and fierce, with a shock of dark hair and lungs full of life. Lillian held her close, tears cutting through her smile. "She's beautiful," I whispered. "She's ours," she said. I sat beside them, my hand trembling as I touched the tiny fingers that curled around mine. I've faced down storms, men, and ghosts, but nothing had ever undone me like that small hand did. We named her Clara, after my mother, and for weeks the house was filled with the kind of noise only love makes. Soft crying, laughter, the creak of floorboards in the middle of the night. Spring came again, slow and tender. The fields bloomed wild, and Clara grew strong. Some evenings I'd carry her out to the porch and tell her about the world, about horses and rain and the sound of her mother's laughter. Lillian would stand in the doorway, smiling the way women do when they've walked through fire and come out carrying light. Sometimes, when the wind caught just right, I'd think back to that day on the trail, the wagon, the dust, her leap into the unknown. I'd remember the weight of her falling, and the way catching her felt like catching my own fate. Now, years later, I still ride out sometimes, Dulcie slower but faithful as ever. I ride to the ridge above Willow Creek, where the horizon opens wide, and I sit there watching the light change. There's peace in it now, not the kind that hides from the past, but the kind that's made its peace with it. Folks in town still call me a lucky man. Maybe I am, but luck had little to do with it. It was choice, hers to jump, mine to catch, and both of ours to hold on after the fall. And on the nights when the fire burns low and the world feels too quiet, I remember her voice, low and certain. You're not alone anymore. She was right. I reckon I never will be again.